And 1 Samuel 6, as we jump into the next chapter, verse 1 says this: Now the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines for 7 months. So the ark, now if this was me, I would get this thing out as quickly as possible, like out of my house, out of my neighborhood, out of my city, right? The ark has moved now from the cities into the country, into the rural lands. Now you might ask, why didn't they just give it back to Israel? Because it was likely that they didn't want to give up this trophy. After conquering Israel, they saw it as this national treasure. They saw it as something valuable. So they want to keep it around. They're going to keep it in the country, away from the cities. And verse 2, and the Philistines, they called for the priests and diviners, saying, What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it to its place. So they called the priests and the diviners, and it's become clear now that though they conquered Israel, they didn't conquer the God of Israel. They're realizing right now they got this big problem. And so in verse 3, so they said, If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return it to him with the trespass offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. So even the Philistines recognize that they've sinned against God, and in doing so, they recognize that they need a trespass offering. In verse 4, then they said, What is this trespass offering which we shall return to him? They answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was on all of you and on all the lords. So they decide that the trespass offering to send back will be 5 golden tumors and mice. Now, personally, I think this is a little weird, but I wasn't there. But they're apparently being judged by, tumors on their body and rats. And so they deemed that this is a fitting sacrifice to give back to God. Now, only Israel would have realized that a proper atonement would have required a blood sacrifice, right? But God here, he's going to overlook that. And verse 5, and he's going to overlook that because they're Philistines. And verse 5, therefore, you shall make images of your tumors and images of your rats, and you shall give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from you, from your gods, and from your land. Notice that phrase, you shall give glory to the God of Israel. Even they recognize that their God was bigger than Dagon. One way to give God glory in your life is, even in the midst of backsliding or even in the midst of rebellion, is to acknowledge that God is the source of discipline. Now, this rarely happens because if we're backsliding in the midst of discipline, we tend to regard it as like bad luck or a coincidence, or maybe we're just angry at God. But notice the phrase in verse 5, perhaps he will lighten his hand from you, from your gods, and from your land. They actually acknowledge that the God of Israel is greater than Dagon, but still, they're not going to submit to him. And notice what they say in verse 6. Why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? When he did mighty things among them, did they not let the people go, that they might depart? Now, mind you, this was 500 years earlier, and they're still remembering this. And they ask, why do you harden your hearts? Even the Philistines, they recognized that hardening their hearts against God was futile. Because they look back at history and they said this didn't work out well for the Egyptians. But think about our lives. Sometimes you and I, sometimes we get mad at God. We harden our hearts and our ego wins out. We think, well, I'm not going to pray. I'm not going to go to church. And we think as if we're hurting God, right? We think as if like it's like destroying God somehow. In one sense it is. It's breaking his heart. But when it becomes stubbornness and hardness, our ego never wins, right? We're never going to, win against God in the arm wrestling contest here.